What if I told you the same system that keeps millions of people trapped in debt is the exact same system the wealthy use to quietly build more wealth every single year? And the moment you understand this one shift, you stop fearing banks, loans, and leverage and start using them like the rich do. The moment you stop fearing money, money starts behaving differently around you. That is the line most people never hear. Most people grow up learning how to earn money, but never how to control it. They are taught how to work for a paycheck, how to survive from month to month, how to save carefully, how to avoid mistakes, how to stay safe. But nobody teaches them how the financial world truly operates behind the curtain. And because of that, millions of intelligent people spend their entire lives trapped inside invisible rules they never agreed to. Rules built by banks, rules built by debt, rules built by fear. Because fear is profitable. A frightened person hesitates. A confused person obeys. And an uninformed borrower becomes a lifelong customer. But in this audiobook, everything changes. Welcome to the Smart Borrower, Make Banks Pay You instead of charging you. This is not a story about reckless spending. This is not financial gambling. And this is not about pretending debt is magical. This audiobook is about power. It is about understanding the system deeply enough to stop being controlled by it. You are about to learn why some people drown in debt while others quietly build freedom using the exact same financial tools. You're about to understand why banks reward certain behaviors, punish others, and secretly depend on one thing more than anything else: your ignorance. Because once you understand how the machine works, you stop walking through life emotionally reacting to money and start strategically directing it. In this audiobook, we will break down leverage, credit psychology, interest manipulation, asset acquisition, income velocity, real estate strategy, business borrowing, modern banking behavior, digital finance in 2025, and the mindset difference between consumers and controllers. You will discover why the wealthy rarely rush to spend their own cash, why the middle class works hardest for money, and why the financially intelligent use systems instead of effort alone. One sentence could change your entire financial future. The poor pay interest, the wealthy collect it. That sentence is not motivational. It is mechanical, because money follows direction, not emotion. And if you listen carefully over the next chapters, you will begin to notice something uncomfortable. The system was never designed to make you financially free automatically. It was designed to reward discipline and punish distraction. Look around. People finance lifestyles they cannot sustain, cars they do not own, phones they upgrade every year, vacations they post online while quietly drowning in monthly payments. And the dangerous part is not the spending, it is the mindset underneath it. Most people borrow emotionally. Very few borrow strategically. That difference determines almost everything. A loan can either buy your freedom or mortgage your future. The tool is neutral. The user changes the outcome. Think about fire. Fire can cook food or destroy a house. Debt works the same way. And for years, ordinary people have been trained to believe the answer is simply to avoid borrowing altogether. But the world's largest corporations do not avoid debt. Major investors do not avoid debt. Real estate empires are not built by hiding from leverage. The difference is education. The difference is emotional control. The difference is understanding when debt creates cash flow and when debt destroys it. Most people never learn that distinction because nobody explains money psychologically. They only explain numbers. But money is never just numbers. Money is behavior. Money is identity. Money is emotion wearing mathematics as a disguise. That is why two people can earn the same income while living completely different futures. One person spends to feel successful. The other builds systems quietly. One borrows for appearances. The other borrows for assets. One buys things that depreciate. The other acquires things that produce. And 5 years later, their lives no longer resemble each other. Not because one worked harder, but because one understood leverage. Leverage. That word intimidates people. But leverage simply means using a smaller force to move something larger. A lever moves stone. A loan moves opportunity. The key question is this: does the thing you borrowed money for create more value than the debt itself? That single question separates intelligent borrowing from financial self-destruction. Because smart borrowers do not ask, "Can I afford the payment?" They ask, "Will this decision produce more income, more equity, more freedom, or more control over time?" That is an entirely different mindset. And mindset always comes before money. You can hand two people the exact same opportunity and watch one build wealth while the other creates stress. Because financial success is rarely about access alone. It is about behavior under pressure. Now, here is the uncomfortable truth nobody likes to admit. Banks are not evil. They are systems. And systems reward predictability. The bank does not hate you. The bank studies patterns. If you are impulsive, emotional, inconsistent, distracted, or financially reactive, the system profits from you. But if you become disciplined, strategic, patient, and educated, the same system begins opening doors. Suddenly, interest rates change. Credit limits rise. Opportunities appear, not because the bank became generous, because you became useful. You became statistically trustworthy, and trust in the financial world is monetized. That is why this audiobook is not really about loans. It is about becoming the type of person who can control financial tools without being emotionally controlled by them. That transformation changes everything. A person without discipline should not seek leverage, because leverage magnifies behavior. If your habits are weak, debt amplifies weakness. If your habits are strong, leverage accelerates strength. Debt reveals character faster than almost anything else. And that is why some people become trapped while others become powerful, using the exact same banks. Now imagine this. Two individuals walk into a bank in 2025. One wants a loan to impress strangers. The other wants a loan to acquire a productive asset. The first borrower is chasing validation. The second borrower is building infrastructure. One thinks emotionally. The other thinks strategically. 5 years later, one still owes money on disappearing purchases, while the other owns assets producing monthly cash flow. Same bank, different psychology, different future. And the scary part? Most people never even realize which path they are on until years disappear. That is why awareness matters, because every financial decision compounds. Every habit compounds. Every payment compounds. Every distraction compounds. Every investment compounds. Life quietly multiplies whatever direction you consistently move in. A careless borrower compounds stress. A disciplined borrower compounds freedom. And in the modern world, financial discipline matters more than ever, because 2025 is a world of engineered distraction. One-click purchases, instant financing, buy now, pay later culture, social media comparison, lifestyle inflation disguised as success. People are consuming faster than they are thinking, and banks know it. Entire industries profit from impulsive behavior. They know exhausted people make emotional purchases. They know insecure people overspend for status. They know distracted people ignore long-term consequences, which means financial intelligence today is not just about money. It is about emotional resistance. Can you delay gratification? Can you stay calm while others panic? Can you think long-term in a short-term culture? That is modern financial power. And here is something almost nobody talks about. The wealthiest people often look less emotional around money, not because they do not care, because they trained themselves to think in systems instead of impulses. They stopped asking, "How do I look rich?" and started asking, "How do I become financially untouchable?" Those are different worlds. One creates appearance, the other creates control. And control is the real luxury, not designer brands, not temporary status, not internet applause. Real luxury is waking up without panic. Real luxury is owning your time. Real luxury is options. Real luxury is peace. And ironically, many people destroy their peace chasing the appearance of success. That is why this audiobook begins with mindset before mechanics. Because if your thinking stays emotional, no strategy will save you long term. You must become difficult to manipulate, difficult to tempt, difficult to pressure, difficult to distract. Because modern finance rewards clarity. And clarity begins when you stop seeing debt as either completely evil or completely harmless. Debt is amplification. It magnifies whoever you already are, which raises a dangerous question. Who are you financially when nobody is watching? Are you disciplined or reactive, patient or impulsive, focused or addicted to appearances? Because banks already know the answer long before most people do. They study behavior patterns relentlessly. Your spending habits, your repayment timing, your financial consistency, your emotional predictability. The system is always watching behavior, and behavior writes financial destiny quietly over time. So before we even discuss advanced borrowing strategies, before we discuss leverage, before we discuss assets, you must understand this foundational truth. The smartest borrower is not the one who borrows the most. It is the one who remains emotionally in control while using borrowed money. That control changes everything. And in the next chapter, we are going to expose one of the biggest lies modern society teaches about ownership itself. Because many people think they own their possessions, while their possessions secretly own them. And once you see that clearly, you will never look at money the same way again. Dear viewer, we now have over 150 videos on our channel. That's a huge number, and we want to thank you, our viewers and subscribers, so much for that. You inspire us to create great videos every time and choose the best topics for our audiobooks. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time to do so. We have big plans for this channel. Thank you. Chapter 2. The illusion of ownership is one of the most expensive lies ever sold to ordinary people. Because most people do not buy things to improve their lives. They buy things to improve how they appear inside the eyes of others. And that single habit quietly drains more wealth than inflation ever will. Think carefully about modern culture. People celebrate purchases more than freedom. A new car gets applause. A luxury watch gets attention. An expensive apartment gets admiration. But almost nobody celebrates low stress. Almost nobody celebrates liquidity. Almost nobody celebrates financial breathing room. And because of that, millions of people spend their best years financing appearances while sacrificing peace. That is the trap. Not debt itself, emotional debt. The need to look successful before becoming financially stable. And banks understand this psychology perfectly. They know people crave identity. They know insecurity spends aggressively. They know comparison weakens discipline. That is why the modern financial world constantly pressures you to upgrade your lifestyle before upgrading your thinking. Bigger house, newer phone, faster car, more subscriptions, more monthly obligations. Everything becomes normalized when payments are divided into smaller pieces. That is the psychological trick. A person who would never spend $20,000 emotionally might comfortably accept $400 per month, and slowly, invisibly, freedom disappears, not all at once, payment by payment. This is how financial pressure enters a person's life quietly, not through catastrophe, through normalization. A payment here, a payment there, another obligation, another renewal, another monthly deduction, until eventually the person wakes up exhausted without understanding why. Because they no longer own their income. Their future earnings have already been promised away. That is the danger of unconscious borrowing. It steals tomorrow to satisfy today. Now listen carefully. There is nothing wrong with wanting beautiful things. There is nothing wrong with enjoying life. This audiobook is not about deprivation. It is about awareness, because there is a difference between using money and using purchases to emotionally medicate insecurity. One builds confidence. The other temporarily masks emptiness. And banks quietly profit from emotional discomfort every single day. Why? Because emotionally unstable consumers are predictable. They spend when sad, spend when stressed, spend when lonely, spend when bored, spend to impress. And modern digital platforms amplify this constantly. A person scrolls social media for 30 minutes and suddenly feels behind in life. Now they want what they were never originally thinking about. The algorithm plants dissatisfaction. The bank finances the reaction. And the cycle repeats. That is why self-control is now a financial superpower. Not intelligence alone. Not income alone. Control. Because the financially dangerous person is not always the poorest person. Sometimes it is the high earner with low discipline. There are people earning six figures who live paycheck to paycheck because their spending rises alongside their income automatically. Every raise becomes a lifestyle upgrade instead of a wealth-building opportunity. That pattern destroys financial momentum. The moment income rises, pressure rises too. Bigger apartment, more luxury, more image maintenance, and eventually the person becomes trapped inside a polished prison. Expensive outside, fragile inside. Now compare that to the strategic borrower. The strategic borrower thinks differently from the beginning. They understand one principle clearly. Every dollar borrowed should either produce income, save significant time, or increase long-term value. That principle changes decision-making completely because now borrowing becomes intentional, no longer emotional, no longer impulsive, strategic. A smart borrower does not chase status first. They chase cash flow, skills, assets, control. And strangely enough, that patience often creates real wealth faster than trying to look wealthy early, because appearances consume, assets produce, One drains energy, the other creates options, and options are priceless. Imagine two friends graduating in the same year. One immediately finances an expensive lifestyle to feel successful. Luxury apartment, brand new car, designer purchases, constant entertainment. The second friend lives below their means temporarily, not forever. Strategically, they study credit, build financial discipline, invest in skills, acquire productive assets carefully. 5 years later, the difference becomes impossible to ignore. The first person looks successful online, but privately feels trapped. The second person looks ordinary, but owns flexibility. And flexibility creates power. Because when crisis comes, the disciplined survive differently. Now here is another truth people avoid. Many financial problems are not mathematical. They are emotional. A person may understand interest rates perfectly, yet still sabotage themselves through impulse. That is why emotional maturity matters financially. Can you tolerate temporary discomfort? Can you delay visible rewards? Can you remain patient while others perform success publicly? That patience is rare today. Modern culture trains urgency constantly. Everything must happen now. Success now. Pleasure now. Recognition now. But wealth rarely grows loudly in the beginning. Usually it grows quietly, slowly, boringly, repeatedly. And that frustrates emotionally reactive people. They want explosive transformation. But sustainable financial power is usually built through controlled repetition. One disciplined month, then another, then another. One wise decision repeated consistently becomes a different life. That is compounding, not just financially, psychologically, because disciplined decisions slowly reshape identity. You begin trusting yourself more, thinking more clearly, feeling less panic around money. That internal shift matters deeply. A financially calm person makes better long-term decisions than a financially emotional one almost every time. And banks know this too, which is why they reward predictability. People often think banks primarily care about wealth. Not exactly. Banks care about reliability. A calm borrower with stable habits often receives better opportunities than a chaotic high-income spender, because financial systems measure behavior patterns relentlessly. And here is where things become interesting. Once you understand the system, you stop resenting it emotionally. Instead, you learn how to position yourself intelligently inside it. That changes your entire relationship with money. You stop asking, "How do I avoid debt completely?" and start asking, "How do I use financial tools without becoming psychologically dependent on them?" That question creates adults financially, because dependency is dangerous. If your lifestyle requires constant borrowing just to survive, you are vulnerable. But if borrowing becomes a controlled strategy attached to productive outcomes, you gain leverage. That distinction changes futures. Now let's talk about one of the most misunderstood ideas in personal finance: cash. Most people worship cash emotionally. They believe paying cash for everything automatically makes them financially intelligent. But wealthy people often think differently, not because cash is bad, because liquidity creates opportunity. Imagine someone has $100,000. They spend all of it buying a luxury car outright. Now, the money is frozen inside a depreciating object. The car loses value. The liquidity disappears. Opportunity shrinks. Meanwhile, another person uses a portion strategically, preserves liquidity, and deploys remaining capital into productive assets. Over time, the second person often advances faster financially. Why? Because they understood capital movement. Money must flow intelligently, not disappear emotionally. That is why financially educated people think in terms of opportunity, cost constantly. Every financial decision asks, what is this money no longer able to do after I spend it here? That question alone can save someone years of regret. Because spending is never only about price, it is about lost possibility. Now, this does not mean obsessing over every dollar fearfully. Fear is not intelligence. Clarity is. And clarity allows balance. The goal is not becoming emotionally cold around money. The goal is becoming emotionally stable around it. There is a difference. A stable person can enjoy life without sabotaging tomorrow. A stable person can borrow strategically without becoming addicted to consumption. A stable person can separate identity from possessions. That separation creates enormous psychological freedom, because then you stop buying things to prove your worth. You already know your worth internally, and once that happens, financial discipline becomes easier. Now let me tell you about something dangerous happening in 2025. Artificial lifestyle inflation. People are exposed to more wealth imagery in 1 week today than previous generations saw in years. Private jets, luxury vacations, millionaire routines, online gurus, crypto fortunes, business empires. Constant exposure distorts normal perception. A person earning a respectable income suddenly feels unsuccessful because the internet keeps showing extremes. This creates emotional pressure to consume prematurely, to catch up, to perform, to signal status, and banks quietly finance the emotional reaction. But here is the hidden truth. Many people displaying wealth online are financially fragile behind the scenes. High income does not automatically mean high net worth. Luxury does not equal freedom. Appearance does not equal peace. Remember that, because one of the smartest financial decisions you will ever make is refusing to compete financially with strangers. That competition never ends. There will always be someone with more, a bigger house, more followers, a newer car, a more visible lifestyle. If your financial decisions are tied to external comparison, you will never feel enough. And never enough is one of the most profitable emotions banks and advertisers can exploit. That is why intelligent borrowers protect their focus aggressively. They think independently. They understand that every unnecessary monthly payment quietly steals future flexibility. Every emotional purchase delays freedom slightly, and every disciplined decision compounds silently. The world celebrates visible spending, but true financial strength is often invisible in the beginning. It looks like restraint, patience, consistency, quiet preparation, and eventually, those quiet habits become loud results. One day, the disciplined borrower realizes something incredible. They are no longer stressed every time a bill arrives, no longer panicking during emergencies, no longer trapped emotionally, because slowly they built margin, and margin changes life. Margin means breathing room. Margin means options. Margin means resilience. Without margin, one emergency becomes catastrophe. With margin, pressure becomes manageable. And the strange part? Most people could build more margin than they realize if they stopped financing identity constantly. Because financial freedom is often less about earning dramatically more and more about reducing unnecessary pressure intelligently. Now, in the next chapter, we are going to enter one of the most powerful concepts in modern wealth building: leverage, the force that built corporations. scaled real estate empires, and accelerated fortunes across generations. But leverage is also dangerous in the hands of emotional people. And if you do not understand the psychology behind it, it can quietly destroy everything you build. Chapter 3. Leverage is one of the most misunderstood forces in the financial world. Some people hear the word and imagine danger immediately. Others hear it and become reckless. Both reactions come from the same problem: lack of understanding. Because leverage is neither good nor evil. It is acceleration. And acceleration only becomes dangerous when the driver lacks control. Think about a powerful car. In disciplined hands, it creates speed with precision. In careless hands, it creates disaster. Leverage works exactly the same way. It magnifies outcomes. If your decisions are intelligent, leverage expands opportunity. If your decisions are emotional, leverage expands consequences. That is why financially mature people respect leverage deeply. They do not worship it blindly, and they do not fear it irrationally. They study it, because leverage changes time itself. That is the part ordinary people often miss. Most people think wealth is built only through hard work and saving, and while discipline matters enormously, time matters even more. Leverage compresses time. It allows someone to control assets today that would otherwise take decades to acquire slowly. A person saves for 30 years to buy an asset outright. Another person strategically borrows, acquires the asset earlier, and allows the asset to grow while time works in their favor. That difference can become massive over a lifetime. Now understand this carefully. Leverage only works when the asset produces more value than the cost of borrowing. That is the core principle. Without that principle, leverage becomes gambling. But with discipline, it becomes one of the most powerful wealth-building tools ever created. This is why major corporations constantly use debt. Not because they are desperate, because they understand capital efficiency. If a company can borrow money at a lower cost than the return generated by expansion, they scale faster. That is strategic leverage. And the wealthy apply similar thinking personally, not emotionally, mathematically. Now pause for a moment and ask yourself something honestly. How many financial decisions around you are based on emotion instead of mathematics? People finance depreciating lifestyles emotionally every single day. But when it comes to borrowing for productive opportunities, suddenly fear appears. That contradiction is fascinating. Society often normalizes destructive debt while criticizing strategic debt. A person borrows $40,000 for a luxury vehicle nobody questions. But borrow money to start a scalable business? People become nervous. Why? Because society often understands consumption better than ownership. Ownership requires responsibility. Consumption requires only desire. And desire is easier. That is why the average person becomes a permanent consumer while others slowly become controllers. Controllers think differently. They ask, what produces? What scales? What creates recurring value? What increases future flexibility? Consumers ask, what feels good now? One mindset builds freedom. The other builds dependency. Now let us go deeper into something important: cash flow. Because leverage without cash flow becomes stress very quickly. Imagine borrowing money for an asset that produces no income while demanding monthly payments. Pressure rises immediately. But now imagine borrowing for an asset that generates enough income to partially or fully cover its own financing costs. The entire emotional experience changes. Why? Because the asset participates in carrying the burden. That changes risk dramatically. This is why financially intelligent people obsess over cash flow. Not appearance, not hype, not emotional excitement. Cash flow, because cash flow creates survival, and survival creates staying power. Most financial failure happens because people run out of time emotionally before their strategy has time to work. Pressure breaks patience. That is why margin matters. And that is why over-leveraging destroys people psychologically. Now listen carefully to this sentence. The goal is not maximum leverage. The goal is controlled leverage. That distinction matters enormously. Some people become intoxicated once they discover borrowing power. They confuse access with intelligence. Just because a bank approves something does not mean it is wise. Banks evaluate statistical probability. You must evaluate quality of life. Never confuse approval with strategy. A bank may approve a massive payment that quietly destroys your flexibility. That is why self-awareness matters more than ego financially. Because ego always wants more visibility, more status, more expansion, more proof. But intelligent borrowing requires restraint. The disciplined borrower understands that preserving stability is more important than appearing impressive. And that mindset creates longevity. Now think about the world today. In 2025, access to leverage is easier than ever before. Digital lending, instant approvals, buy now, pay later systems, crypto-backed loans, AI-powered financing platforms. Money moves faster than at any point in history. And that speed creates danger for emotionally reactive people. Because convenience weakens caution. When friction disappears, impulse grows stronger. That is why modern borrowers must become psychologically stronger than previous generations, not weaker. You must slow yourself down intentionally. Think before signing. Think before upgrading. Think before committing future income emotionally. Because future income is life energy. Every payment represents hours of your future existence. That reality should create awareness. Now, here is another dangerous trap. Many people confuse leverage with escape. They think borrowing alone will solve deeper problems. It will not. Money amplifies behavior and habits already present. If someone lacks discipline before leverage, they usually become more chaotic after gaining access to it. That is why financial growth must happen alongside personal growth. A person who cannot manage small responsibilities usually struggles with larger ones too. And banks know this. That is why financial systems reward consistency more than excitement. Consistent payments, consistent income, consistent behavior. Predictability creates trust, and trust creates opportunity. Now let me tell you about a psychological shift that changes everything financially. Most people see debt as a burden. Strategic thinkers see debt as rented opportunity. That is a different lens entirely. If borrowed money allows you to acquire something that increases productivity, income, or long-term equity, the debt becomes temporary, while the asset may continue producing for years. That is how strategic leverage works. Now, obviously, this requires intelligence and caution. Not every opportunity is wise. Not every asset performs. Not every investment succeeds, which is exactly why emotional discipline matters more than optimism. Hope is not strategy. Numbers matter. Research matters. Patience matters. And one of the smartest things you can ever learn financially is this: never borrow based on fantasy projections. Base decisions on conservative reality. Assume setbacks. Assume delays. Assume volatility. Because strong strategies survive pressure. Weak strategies collapse under it. Now here is where many people fail emotionally. They become impatient. They want leverage to create immediate transformation. But sustainable wealth usually grows through layered consistency. One asset, then another. One disciplined decision repeated. One intelligent system built carefully. Most financially free people did not become free overnight. They became free gradually, while emotionally immature people quit halfway because the progress looked too slow. But slow progress compounds, and compounding becomes extraordinary over time. Think about a tree. For years, growth seems small, invisible almost. Then eventually roots become strong enough to support enormous expansion. Financial intelligence works the same way. The early years often look boring externally, but internally, systems are forming, habits are stabilizing, credit is strengthening, assets are accumulating, pressure is decreasing, and eventually momentum becomes visible. Now let's talk about something almost nobody discusses honestly: the emotional pressure of appearing successful too early. This destroys countless futures. People feel embarrassed living below their means temporarily. Embarrassed driving older vehicles. Embarrassed saying no to unnecessary spending. Why? Because society rewards visible consumption immediately, while rewarding discipline later. But later is where freedom lives, and emotionally mature people understand delayed respect is still respect. They are willing to look ordinary while building extraordinary stability quietly. That patience separates performers from builders. Performers need applause constantly. Builders need progress, and progress often happens silently. Now imagine someone earning moderate income but controlling their expenses intelligently. They build credit carefully, use leverage strategically, acquire productive assets slowly, maintain liquidity, avoid emotional spending. 10 years later, that person may possess enormous stability compared to someone who earned more but spent emotionally. Why? Because financial outcomes are heavily behavioral. Income matters, but behavior determines whether income becomes freedom or pressure. And this is where the conversation becomes uncomfortable, because many people secretly want the appearance of wealth more than the responsibilities of actual wealth. Real wealth requires patience, control, delayed gratification, long-term thinking. Those qualities are rare in a dopamine-driven culture. That rarity creates opportunity for disciplined people, because while others react emotionally, disciplined individuals quietly position themselves. And positioning matters enormously. A smart borrower prepares before opportunity arrives. They improve credit before needing capital, strengthen habits before scaling, study systems before using them. Preparation creates leverage safely. Unprepared people use leverage emotionally. Prepared people use leverage strategically. That difference changes lives. Now, here is one of the greatest financial truths you will ever hear. The bank is not your enemy. Your emotional instability is. Because unstable emotions create unstable decisions. Unstable decisions create unnecessary pressure. And pressure destroys clarity. That is why calmness is financially valuable. A calm borrower negotiates better, thinks better, waits better, chooses better. Emotional urgency usually creates expensive mistakes. Now, in the next chapter, we are going to expose the hidden psychology behind credit itself. Because credit is not just a score. It is a behavioral reputation system. And once you understand how the system evaluates you psychologically, you can begin positioning yourself differently forever. Chapter 4. Credit is one of the strangest inventions in modern society. Invisible, yet powerful enough to determine where you live, what opportunities you receive, how much interest you pay, and sometimes even how confidently institutions treat you. Most people think credit is about money. It is not. Credit is about trust. More specifically, measured behavioral trust. That is what the system is really evaluating, not your personality, not your dreams, not your intentions, your patterns. And this is where financially intelligent people begin separating themselves from the crowd. Because once you understand that credit is essentially a behavioral reputation system, you stop treating it casually. You begin realizing every financial action leaves fingerprints. Every payment, every missed deadline, every balance, every application, every habit. The system watches consistency relentlessly. Now think about something fascinating. A person can earn a high income and still have weak financial credibility. Another person with moderate income can build strong financial trust over time. Why? Because systems value reliability more than excitement. That is one of the biggest misunderstandings in personal finance. People think wealth automatically equals financial intelligence. Not always. Some high earners are financially chaotic. Some modest earners are extremely disciplined. And discipline compounds always. Now let's go deeper. Most people use credit emotionally. They see available credit and interpret it as spending power. That mindset creates traps immediately because available credit is not permission. It is responsibility disguised as opportunity. And emotionally reactive people often cannot tell the difference. That is why financial institutions make enormous profits from impulsive behavior. Late fees, interest accumulation, minimum payment cycles, extended financing structures. The system quietly rewards patience while punishing emotional urgency. But here is the powerful part. Once you understand the rules, you can begin using the same system strategically. You stop becoming the product and start becoming the operator. Now imagine two people with identical incomes. The first person spends emotionally, misses payments occasionally, carries high balances, and reacts impulsively to financial stress. The second person pays consistently, manages utilization carefully, maintains stability, and thinks long-term. Over time, the system treats these people completely differently. Different interest rates, different approvals, different access, different opportunities, not because one person is morally better, because one person became statistically predictable, and predictability creates trust. That is why credit is deeply psychological. It measures delayed gratification, consistency, emotional control, behavior under pressure. The score itself is only the surface. Underneath it, the system is evaluating habits. Now listen carefully to this sentence. Your financial reputation travels ahead of you before you enter the room. That matters. Because financially intelligent people understand reputation reduces friction. Good credit lowers costs, increases options, creates flexibility, improves negotiation power, and flexibility changes life. Imagine needing capital during an emergency or opportunity. One person has weak financial positioning, the other prepared years in advance. The second person moves calmly, while the first person panics. That difference did not happen overnight. It was built quietly through repeated behavior. Now here is something dangerous in modern culture. Many people want financial freedom without wanting financial responsibility. They want the outcomes without the habits. But systems do not reward wishes. They reward consistency. And consistency often looks boring externally. Paying on time, avoiding unnecessary applications, managing balances intelligently, thinking before borrowing. Simple behaviors repeated long enough become powerful. Now let us talk about one of the biggest mistakes people make with credit. Confusing access with wealth. Just because a bank increases your limit does not mean your life improved financially. That distinction is critical. Many people celebrate increased borrowing power while simultaneously increasing lifestyle pressure. They expand obligations faster than stability, and slowly, flexibility disappears. The smart borrower reacts differently. Instead of asking, "How much can I spend?" they ask, "How much flexibility can I preserve?" That question creates different decisions immediately because flexibility is hidden wealth. A person with fewer obligations often possesses more real freedom than someone earning significantly more but trapped by financial commitments. And the modern world constantly encourages commitment expansion. Upgrade, subscribe, finance, renew, extend. Everything is engineered toward recurring payments. Why? Because recurring payments create predictable revenue for institutions. But predictable payments can also quietly create unpredictable stress for individuals. That is why awareness matters so much today, especially in 2025, where digital finance has become frictionless. One-tap approvals, instant credit offers, embedded financing everywhere. Convenience is no longer neutral. Convenience influences behavior. The easier spending becomes, the more discipline matters. Now let's talk about emotional borrowing. This is where many intelligent people quietly sabotage themselves. They borrow during emotional peaks. Excitement, insecurity, pressure, comparison, loneliness, and emotional states distort future thinking. A person feels successful temporarily after acquiring something expensive, without fully calculating long-term consequences. That emotional high fades quickly, but the payment remains. That is dangerous, because financially immature decisions often begin as emotional attempts to solve psychological discomfort. Status anxiety, fear of missing out, need for validation, and modern advertising exploits this constantly. You are not just sold products anymore, you are sold identities. The luxury car is not marketed as transportation, it is marketed as significance. The designer item is not marketed as fabric, it is marketed as status. The expensive lifestyle is marketed as proof of worth, and millions of people unconsciously borrow money trying to purchase emotional certainty externally. But certainty never arrives that way, because identity purchased externally always requires maintenance, and maintenance becomes expensive psychologically and financially. Now compare that to the smart borrower. The smart borrower separates self-worth from visible consumption. That changes everything, because now decisions become strategic instead of emotional. Borrowing becomes intentional. Credit becomes a tool. Payments become calculated. Risk becomes managed. And peace increases. Now here's something powerful. A strong credit profile is not just about borrowing. It is about optionality. Optionality means choices. The ability to move quickly when opportunity appears. The ability to negotiate from strength, the ability to remain calm during uncertainty. That calmness becomes a competitive advantage, especially during economic instability, because economic cycles always expose behavior. When markets tighten, undisciplined people panic, over-leveraged lifestyles crack, emotional decisions surface, but disciplined individuals often survive differently. Why? Because they built systems instead of appearances. They built margin, preparedness, liquidity, behavioral consistency. And systems protect people when emotions fail. Now listen carefully. Financial maturity means understanding that not every available opportunity should be taken. That lesson alone can save years of stress. Some people destroy themselves chasing endless expansion. More properties, more loans, more risk, more pressure. At some point, leverage stops creating freedom and starts creating fragility. That is why intelligent borrowers monitor stress carefully, not just profits. Because a strategy that destroys your peace is eventually unsustainable, and sustainable always outperforms chaotic intensity long term. Now, here is another critical truth. Credit should support your strategy, not become your strategy. Too many people mistake financial engineering for actual wealth creation. But debt alone never creates prosperity. Productivity does. Cash flow does. Skills do. Ownership does. Systems do. Debt is only fuel, and fuel without direction creates fire. That is why education matters first. Not excitement, not hype, not shortcuts. Real financial growth requires clarity. Now imagine a person who spends 3 years strengthening their financial position quietly, paying consistently, reducing unnecessary obligations, improving habits, studying assets, developing skills, protecting focus. Externally, their life may not appear dramatic, but internally, they are becoming powerful, because eventually, opportunity arrives. And prepared people move differently than desperate people. Desperation accepts bad terms. Preparation negotiates. That distinction changes futures. Now let us address something many people secretly fear: failure. Because financial mistakes carry emotional weight, embarrassment, regret, shame, anxiety. And unfortunately, many people hide from financial truth emotionally instead of confronting it clearly. But avoidance always increases pressure. Awareness reduces it. You cannot improve what you refuse to examine honestly. That is why financially intelligent people develop the courage to face numbers calmly. Income, debt, spending, habits, patterns, without denial, without ego. Because clarity creates control. And control creates confidence, not fake confidence, not social media confidence, real confidence, the kind built from preparation. Now, in the next chapter, we are going to explore one of the most dangerous financial traps in modern life: lifestyle inflation, the invisible force that causes millions of people to earn more money, while somehow feeling financially worse every year. And if you do not understand how this trap operates psychologically, you can spend an entire lifetime running faster without ever becoming free. Hey there, we want to remind you that we often choose topics suggested by you, our viewers, in the comments. In the comments, you can suggest a topic or ask a question about what you'd like to see in our video. We read every comment carefully, so we promise not to miss a single one. Thank you. Let's keep going. Chapter 5. Lifestyle inflation rarely feels dangerous in the beginning. That is why it traps so many intelligent people. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to become financially trapped. It happens slowly, quietly, one upgrade at a time, a slightly more expensive apartment, a newer car, better restaurants, higher subscriptions, luxury habits disguised as rewarding yourself. And eventually, the person earning more money somehow feels more pressure instead of less. That contradiction confuses millions of people. How am I making more but still feeling stuck? Because income alone does not create freedom. Margin does. And lifestyle inflation quietly destroys margin. Now think about modern society carefully. Success is constantly measured visually, not emotionally, not mentally, not spiritually, visually. People are trained to display progress externally before building stability internally. And that pressure creates dangerous financial behavior. Someone receives a raise and immediately upgrades their lifestyle to match it, not strategically, emotionally. Because humans naturally adapt to comfort quickly. What once felt luxurious soon feels normal. And once something becomes normal, losing it feels painful. That is the hidden psychological trap. People become emotionally attached to upgraded lifestyles before building lasting financial foundations underneath them. And banks quietly benefit from this process every day. Why? Because permanent lifestyle expansion usually creates permanent borrowing dependence. The higher the lifestyle, the more pressure required to maintain it. And pressure changes people. Pressure creates anxiety. Anxiety creates emotional decisions. Emotional decisions create financial fragility. Now listen carefully to this sentence. Many people are not rich. They are temporarily financed. That distinction matters enormously. A person may appear wealthy publicly while privately surviving on obligations. Car payments, credit balances, luxury financing, subscription overload, mortgage pressure, everything looks impressive until one disruption appears. Job loss, economic slowdown, medical emergency, market shift. Suddenly, the entire structure becomes unstable. Why? Because the lifestyle expanded faster than the foundation. That is why intelligent borrowers move differently. They understand that visible upgrades should happen slower than invisible stability, and that patience creates resilience. Now, let us explore something uncomfortable. Many people spend money to regulate emotion, not consciously, automatically. Stress spending, celebration spending, loneliness spending, comparison spending. And modern digital platforms intensify this constantly. You scroll through social media and suddenly your current life feels smaller. Not because your life changed, because perception changed. That is psychologically dangerous, especially when borrowing becomes emotionally attached to identity. Now, borrowing is no longer about utility. It becomes emotional signaling. I made it. I belong. I matter. But financial peace cannot be purchased through appearances, because appearance-based lifestyles require constant maintenance, and maintenance becomes exhausting. Now compare that to someone focused on actual freedom. Their decisions look different. They ask, does this increase my flexibility? Does this strengthen my future? Does this create pressure or reduce it? Will this matter in 5 years? Those questions create powerful filtering. Emotion slows down. Clarity increases. And once clarity increases, many unnecessary purchases lose emotional power immediately. Because the smart borrower understands a dangerous truth. Every recurring payment silently steals future choices. That does not mean avoid all pleasure. It means protect your flexibility carefully, because flexibility is hidden power. the ability to leave toxic environments, the ability to survive downturns calmly, the ability to take opportunities quickly. People underestimate how valuable flexibility becomes during uncertain times, and uncertainty is guaranteed in life. That is why disciplined people often appear behind temporarily, until reality tests everyone. Then suddenly, stability becomes attractive. Now let us talk about something modern culture almost never teaches properly: enough. Most people never define it. How much is enough income, enough status, enough comfort, enough consumption? Without a definition of enough, desire becomes endless. And endless desire creates permanent dissatisfaction. That dissatisfaction becomes profitable for entire industries. Advertising depends on making you feel incomplete, because incomplete people consume more aggressively. But the emotionally grounded person becomes harder to manipulate. They can enjoy success without becoming addicted to escalation. That balance matters, because there is nothing wrong with ambition. The problem is unconscious escalation. A person increases income, then automatically increases pressure, more expensive obligations, more maintenance, more complexity. Eventually, they are earning more than ever, while feeling less free than before. Now listen carefully. Freedom is not determined only by income. Freedom is determined by the gap between what you earn and what you require to sustain your life emotionally. That gap is everything. A person earning modest income with strong margin may feel calmer than someone earning triple the amount while drowning in obligations. Why? Because stress follows pressure more than salary, and modern society normalizes financial pressure dangerously. People joke about being broke while financing luxury, joke about debt while expanding lifestyle, joke about exhaustion while chasing appearances. But underneath the humor, many people are quietly anxious, because deep down they know the structure is fragile. Now here is something powerful. The smart borrower understands timing. Just because you can upgrade now does not mean you should. Temporary restraint can create permanent advantage later. That mindset separates builders from performers. Builders think in decades, performers think in impressions, and impressions fade quickly. Now imagine two people receiving the same major salary increase. The first immediately upgrades lifestyle dramatically: luxury apartment, new vehicle, more vacations, more visible consumption. The second increases investments, liquidity, skill development, and productive assets first. Externally, the second person may appear less successful temporarily, but internally, they are creating infrastructure. Years later, the difference becomes enormous. One person became dependent on income continuity. The other built systems reducing dependence over time. That is real progress. Reducing dependency, because dependency creates vulnerability, and vulnerability increases fear. Now let us go deeper into something emotionally important: delayed gratification. This skill alone changes financial destiny more than most people realize. The ability to tolerate temporary discomfort for long-term advantage. That sounds simple. But in a dopamine-driven world, it becomes rare. Everything today encourages immediacy, instant entertainment, instant delivery, instant approval, instant financing. People are losing their ability to wait. And when patience disappears, financial mistakes multiply, because wealth usually grows slower than emotion wants. That frustrates many people. They want dramatic results quickly. But sustainable wealth behaves more like farming than gambling. Plant, protect, wait, repeat, quietly, and eventually compounding begins doing extraordinary work beneath the surface. Now, here is another critical truth. A disciplined life eventually becomes cheaper emotionally. Think about that. When your finances are organized, stress decreases, decision-making improves, relationships improve, sleep improves, focus improves, discipline creates peace, while chaos creates hidden costs everywhere, financially, emotionally, mentally. That is why smart borrowing is ultimately about self-control more than mathematics. Mathematics matters, but emotional regulation matters first. Can you resist social pressure? Can you avoid emotional upgrades? Can you separate self-worth from lifestyle? Those questions determine long-term outcomes far more than flashy financial tricks. Now let us address something many people secretly fear: looking behind compared to others. This destroys countless futures emotionally. People rush financial decisions because they feel embarrassed progressing slowly. But comparison is dangerous because you rarely see the full picture. You see lifestyle, not pressure. You see consumption, not debt. You see appearance, not anxiety. And some of the most financially stressed people appear the most successful publicly. Never forget that. The internet displays highlights, not obligations. That is why emotionally mature people stop competing publicly. They compete privately against their own previous habits instead. Better discipline, better decisions, better systems, better emotional control. That creates sustainable confidence, not performance-based confidence, real confidence. Now, here is one of the greatest financial advantages you can ever develop: the ability to say no without feeling inferior. No to unnecessary upgrades. No to emotional spending. No to social pressure. No to appearances that compromise peace. That skill protects futures, because every unnecessary obligation quietly steals energy. And energy matters. A financially exhausted person struggles to think strategically. Pressure narrows thinking. That is why intelligent borrowers protect simplicity carefully, not because they lack ambition, because they understand complexity creates fragility when unmanaged. Now, in the next chapter, we are going to discuss one of the most powerful mindset shifts in modern wealth creation: the difference between consumers and acquirers. Because most people spend their lives buying things, while a smaller group quietly acquires systems that buy things for them. And once you understand that distinction deeply, your relationship with money will never be the same again. Chapter 6. There are two financial identities quietly competing inside modern society: consumers and acquirers. Most people never realize which one they became, because the difference is not visible immediately. At first, both groups may shop in the same places, drive similar cars, earn similar incomes, but underneath the surface, their psychology is completely different. Consumers spend money to experience temporary satisfaction. Acquirers deploy money to increase future control. That distinction changes everything. Now, understand this clearly: there is nothing wrong with enjoying life. The problem begins when consumption becomes your primary financial behavior instead of ownership. Because consumers ask, "What can I buy?" Acquirers ask, "What can I own that produces?" That one shift separates financial dependency from financial expansion. And most people are unconsciously trained to become consumers from childhood. Consume entertainment, consume products, consume trends, consume status, consume upgrades. Very few people are taught to think like owners. Ownership requires patience, responsibility, delayed gratification, long-term thinking. Consumption requires impulse. That is why consumer culture spreads faster emotionally. Now think carefully about this. A consumer sees income as permission to spend. An acquirer sees income as fuel to build systems. That creates radically different futures over time. Imagine two people earning the same salary for 10 years. One spends most income upgrading lifestyle constantly. The other acquires productive assets gradually. Not glamorous at first, not flashy, not viral online, but quietly strategic. Over time, one person remains dependent on active labor forever, while the other slowly builds income-producing systems. And eventually, the systems begin carrying part of life's weight. That is the turning point. The moment money begins working independently of your direct physical effort. Most people never reach that stage because consumption absorbs everything before ownership can compound. Now let us talk about one of the greatest misconceptions modern society promotes. People believe wealth is about income size. Not exactly. Wealth is more accurately about asset control. Because income without ownership often creates temporary comfort, not lasting freedom. A high-income consumer can still be fragile. A moderate income owner can become powerful over time. Ownership compounds differently. Now pause for a moment and think honestly. What percentage of your financial energy currently builds ownership instead of temporary experience? That question matters deeply. Because life naturally expands toward whatever behavior you repeat most often. Repeated consumption creates dependency. Repeated acquisition creates leverage. And leverage changes possibilities. Now here is where smart borrowing enters the conversation strategically. The intelligent borrower understands borrowed money should ideally help acquire productive value, not just temporary stimulation. A loan used to build cash flow behaves differently than a loan used to finance identity. One creates future possibility. The other mortgages future flexibility. That distinction must become emotionally clear. Now let us explore the psychology behind acquisition. Acquirers think long-term instinctively. They are willing to look ordinary temporarily while building extraordinary infrastructure quietly. This requires emotional maturity because modern culture rewards visible consumption immediately. People clap for purchases, rarely for patience, but patience creates power. And eventually, power becomes visible naturally. Now imagine a young professional in 2025. They begin earning more money than anyone in their family previously earned. Immediately, the world pressures them toward visible success. Luxury apartment, premium lifestyle, travel, designer status, online image maintenance. And because social media constantly amplifies comparison, the pressure intensifies psychologically. But another path exists. Instead of maximizing appearance immediately, they strategically maximize ownership. They strengthen financial habits, study assets, improve credit, acquire productive investments slowly, preserve liquidity. Externally, this path may appear less exciting initially. Internally, it builds stability, and stability compounds into freedom over time. That is the hidden advantage disciplined people possess. They can tolerate delayed visibility. Emotionally immature people cannot. That is why many people sabotage themselves financially during periods of increasing income. They feel they must prove progress externally, but proving success and building success are often completely different activities. One is performance. The other is construction. Construction takes time. Now let us go deeper into something important: assets. An asset is not simply something expensive. That misunderstanding traps many people. An expensive object is not automatically an asset. An asset is something that produces value, income, equity, appreciation, or strategic advantage over time. That is the key. Production. Consumers focus on ownership of things. Acquirers focus on ownership of systems. Systems scale, systems survive, systems produce repeatedly. And once you understand this, your financial decisions begin changing automatically. You start evaluating purchases differently, not emotionally first, strategically first. Will this create future value? Will this increase flexibility? Will this reduce dependency? Will this strengthen my position 5 years from now? Those questions reshape identity slowly. Now here is another powerful truth. Acquirers become harder to manipulate emotionally. Why? Because they no longer rely on consumption for emotional validation. That changes their entire relationship with advertising, trends, and social pressure. They stop chasing identity externally. And once identity becomes internally stable, financial discipline becomes dramatically easier because emotional spending weakens. Now think about how modern marketing operates. Companies rarely sell products directly anymore. They sell emotional narratives, status, confidence, belonging, attractiveness, importance. And consumers unconsciously spend trying to purchase those emotional states. But acquirers recognize the game. They understand confidence built through ownership lasts longer than confidence purchased through appearance. That insight creates enormous financial advantage over decades. Now let us talk about time. Consumers sacrifice future time for present emotion. Acquirers sacrifice temporary comfort for future control. That difference compounds massively because every unnecessary payment quietly claims future hours of your life. Every obligation requires future labor. The smart borrower understands this deeply. That is why they borrow intentionally, not carelessly, not emotionally, purposefully. Now here is a dangerous trap many people fall into once they begin learning about leverage and assets. They become obsessed with speed. They want rapid wealth immediately. But intelligent acquisition is rarely emotional. It is methodical. One strong decision repeated consistently often outperforms chaotic intensity because sustainable systems survive longer. And survival matters enormously financially. A mediocre strategy sustained for 20 years often beats an aggressive strategy abandoned after 2. That is why emotional regulation matters so much. Can you remain patient while building? Can you tolerate gradual progress? Can you avoid comparison during the quiet years? Those abilities determine whether compounding has time to work. Now imagine planting a forest. The early stages look unimpressive. Tiny growth, little visible change. But underground, roots strengthen quietly. Years later, the landscape transforms completely. Ownership works similarly. The beginning often feels slow. Then momentum appears suddenly. And most people quit before momentum arrives. Why? Because consumer culture trained them to expect instant emotional rewards, but ownership rewards patience instead. Now let us discuss something few people understand emotionally. True wealth often looks boring before it looks impressive. Consistency, repetition, discipline, systems, nothing glamorous externally. But internally, power accumulates. That is why emotionally mature people stop chasing constant excitement financially. Excitement often destroys discipline. Calmness builds it, and calmness becomes easier when your identity is no longer attached to visible consumption. Now here's another critical distinction. Consumers seek comfort first. Acquirers seek positioning first. Positioning means preparing for future opportunity, liquidity, credit strength, knowledge, relationships, assets, skills. Prepared people move differently during economic shifts. While others panic, they acquire. While others freeze, they position. And positioning during uncertainty creates enormous long-term advantage. Now think about the global economy today. AI transformation, digital finance evolution, automation, remote business models, changing labor markets. The world is shifting rapidly. In unstable environments, ownership becomes even more important. Why? Because dependency becomes riskier. The person relying entirely on one income source remains vulnerable. The person building multiple forms of ownership gains resilience. That resilience matters deeply in the modern world. Now here is one of the greatest mindset shifts you can ever develop. Stop asking how to look financially successful. Start asking how to become financially difficult to control. That question changes priorities immediately. Because true freedom is not about impressing strangers. It is about reducing desperation, reducing dependency, reducing panic, reducing vulnerability. Ownership does that slowly. Now let us talk about emotional pressure again. Many people secretly fear becoming boring if they become financially disciplined. But discipline is not deprivation. It is direction. The disciplined person can still enjoy life, travel, celebrate, experience beauty. But they do so from stability instead of desperation. That emotional difference matters enormously. Because experiences funded from peace feel completely different than experiences funded from pressure. Now here is something worth remembering forever. The consumer works hardest for lifestyle. The acquirer works hardest for freedom. And freedom changes everything. It changes how you think, how you negotiate, how you sleep, how you move through the world emotionally. Because once desperation decreases, clarity increases. And clarity creates better decisions everywhere. Now, in the next chapter, we are going to discuss one of the most powerful financial forces ever discovered: compound growth, the invisible engine quietly separating those who build lasting wealth from those who remain trapped in constant effort. And once you truly understand how compounding behaves psychologically and financially, you will begin respecting time in an entirely different way. Dear viewers, write which city you're from. It's interesting to see which corners of the world are watching our videos. Chapter 7. Compound growth is one of the quietest forces in the world. That is why most people underestimate it. Human beings naturally notice dramatic change, sudden success, explosive results, instant transformation. But compounding rarely behaves dramatically in the beginning. At first, it feels almost invisible. And because it feels invisible, emotionally impatient people abandon it too early. That is one of the costliest mistakes a person can make financially. Now, listen carefully to this sentence. Small, disciplined decisions repeated long enough become unrecognizable from magic. That is compounding, not hype, not luck, not fantasy, accumulation. Most people understand compound interest mathematically. Very few understand it psychologically. Because compounding does not only affect money, it affects habits, skills, relationships, health, confidence, discipline, debt. Life quietly multiplies whatever direction you consistently move in. That truth should wake you up. Because many people think occasional effort creates extraordinary outcomes. No, repeated direction creates outcomes. Every payment compounds, every investment compounds, Every distraction compounds, every excuse compounds, every disciplined hour compounds. Nothing stays neutral for long. Now imagine two people beginning adulthood at the same time. The first person lives emotionally, reactive spending, minimal planning, constant upgrades, no strategic ownership, no consistent investing. The second person lives intentionally, smaller but repeated investments, improved habits, skill development, controlled borrowing, asset acquisition. 5 years pass, the difference looks small. 10 years pass, the gap becomes noticeable. 20 years pass, their lives barely resemble each other anymore. Why? Compounding. And the scary part is this: compounding works whether you understand it or not. Debt compounds, stress compounds, financial carelessness compounds too. That is why awareness matters early, because small patterns repeated long enough become identity. Now let us talk about one of the most dangerous financial myths ever created: the belief that small decisions do not matter. That lie destroys futures quietly. People think it's only one purchase, it's only one payment, it's only one unnecessary subscription. But life is rarely changed by one massive moment alone. Usually life changes through repeated patterns. A tiny leak sinks ships slowly, and financially intelligent people understand this deeply. They respect repeated behavior. That is why smart borrowers do not just analyze large financial decisions. They analyze recurring patterns. Because recurring patterns shape financial destiny more than isolated moments. Now think carefully about debt for a moment. Debt compounds differently depending on behavior. Strategic debt can accelerate ownership. Emotional debt accelerates dependency. The mathematics may look similar initially, but the outcomes diverge massively over time. A productive asset can compound wealth. A financed lifestyle compounds pressure. That is why intentionality matters, and intentionality requires slowing down emotionally. Now here is another powerful truth: compounding rewards patience more aggressively than talent. That frustrates impatient people, because modern culture worships speed, fast success, fast money, fast transformation. But sustainable wealth rarely behaves emotionally, it behaves systematically. Repeated investments, repeated discipline, repeated positioning, boring at first, extraordinary later. That is why emotionally mature people learn to trust slow progress. They stop needing constant external validation, because they understand something most people miss. The early stages of compounding are supposed to feel unimpressive. That is normal. Now imagine planting bamboo. For years, almost nothing visible happens above the ground. But underground, roots spread aggressively. Then eventually growth accelerates dramatically. Financial compounding works similarly. The invisible years matter enormously, and unfortunately, many people quit during invisible seasons because they mistake quiet progress for failure. But invisible progress is still progress. Now let us discuss something deeply important psychologically: the relationship between time and emotion. Emotion always wants immediate reward. Compounding rewards, delayed reward. That creates internal conflict constantly. A person knows investing is wise, but consumption feels better immediately. A person knows discipline matters, but comfort feels easier now. That is why emotional control becomes financially valuable. The ability to delay pleasure strategically changes everything. Not forever, strategically. Now listen carefully. The smart borrower understands that time can either become an ally or an enemy. High-interest emotional debt turns time against you. Strategic ownership turns time into your partner. That difference compounds massively over decades. And many people do not realize how dangerous financial delay can become. Because every year without intentionality strengthens momentum in one direction or another. That is why starting matters. Not perfectly, but consistently. Now here is where people become discouraged. They compare their beginning to someone else's middle. That destroys patience, especially in 2025, where social media constantly displays accelerated lifestyles. People see overnight success stories daily, massive gains, luxury experiences, viral wealth narratives, and slowly they lose respect for gradual progress. That is dangerous, because gradual progress built civilization, not viral moments. The strongest financial structures are usually built slowly, brick by brick, decision by decision, year by year. And once momentum compounds, results begin appearing exponential. Now think about credit again. Strong credit compounds, trust compounds, relationships compound, knowledge compounds. A disciplined borrower who consistently behaves responsibly becomes increasingly powerful over time. Lower rates, better opportunities, more flexibility, stronger negotiation power. All because repeated behavior created expanding trust, compounding rewards, consistency relentlessly. Now, let us go deeper into investment psychology. Most people try to become wealthy emotionally. That almost always fails. Why? Because emotions create inconsistency. People become excited during good times, fearful during downturns, impulsive during uncertainty. But compounding requires steadiness. The disciplined investor, the disciplined borrower, the disciplined builder, these people often look less exciting publicly until years pass. Then suddenly their lives appear dramatically different, not because of one lucky moment, because consistency accumulated silently. Now here is another truth worth remembering forever. Financial freedom is usually built through repetition, not intensity. Intensity burns hot temporarily. Repetition changes identity. That is why systems matter more than motivation long-term. Motivation fluctuates, systems continue, and intelligent borrowers build systems intentionally. Automatic investing, controlled spending, strategic repayment, asset acquisition habits, liquidity management, not glamorous, but powerful, because systems reduce emotional interference. Now imagine someone who improves financially only 1% each week. One better decision, one unnecessary expense removed, one additional productive habit, one strategic investment. At first the change feels tiny, but over years, the trajectory becomes completely different. That is the beauty of compounding. Tiny directional improvements become enormous life differences over time. Now let us discuss something painful, but necessary. Negative compounding. This destroys many lives silently. A person ignores financial discipline for years. Small debts accumulate, stress accumulates, interest accumulates, avoidance accumulates. Eventually, pressure becomes overwhelming. And the tragedy is, the person often thinks the crisis appeared suddenly. But it did not. It compounded quietly. That is why awareness matters early, and that is why honesty matters emotionally. You must be willing to confront reality calmly. Not shamefully, not emotionally. Calmly. Because awareness interrupts destructive compounding. Now let us connect this to self-worth. Many people sabotage financial progress because emotionally they do not believe stability is possible for them. So they chase temporary pleasure repeatedly instead of long-term structure. That pattern becomes self-fulfilling. But disciplined repetition can rebuild identity slowly. A person begins keeping promises to themselves financially, making smarter decisions, creating small wins. Confidence grows gradually, not fake confidence, earned confidence, the kind built through consistency. And consistency compounds psychologically too. Now here is one of the greatest advantages disciplined people possess. They stop needing dramatic results constantly to remain committed. They trust process. That trust creates enormous resilience because life always contains volatility, economic downturns, unexpected expenses, market shifts, personal setbacks. Emotionally reactive people panic during volatility, but disciplined individuals continue positioning themselves steadily. And over long periods, steadiness usually wins. Now think about the banking system again. Banks themselves are built on compounding, interest, reinvestment, long-term repayment structures. The system understands compounding extremely well. That is why financially intelligent individuals learn to use the same principle personally instead of unconsciously fighting against it. You either become someone compounding assets or someone compounding obligations. One creates increasing freedom. The other creates increasing pressure. Now let us discuss patience one more time. Patience is not passive. That misunderstanding confuses many people. Patience is active consistency without emotional panic. That is strength. And financially mature people develop that strength intentionally because they understand something deeply. The person who remains disciplined long enough often reaches places emotional people never sustain. Now here is a sentence you should remember forever. Compounding is life rewarding people who refuse to quit intelligently. Not blindly, intelligently. That distinction matters. Now in the next chapter, we are going to explore one of the most emotionally dangerous forces in modern financial life. Fear. Fear of investing. Fear of borrowing. Fear of failing. Fear of looking foolish. Fear of starting too late. Because fear silently controls more financial decisions than mathematics ever will. And if you do not learn how to think clearly while afraid, you can spend your entire life standing still while opportunities pass you by. Chapter 8. Fear has destroyed more financial futures than failure ever did. Read that again. Carefully. Not failure. Fear. Because failure teaches. Failure exposes weakness. Failure forces adaptation. But fear? Fear freezes. Fear delays. Fear hesitates. Fear rationalizes inaction while time quietly disappears. And financially, time matters more than most people realize. Now understand something deeply important. Every person you admire financially has experienced uncertainty. Every investor, every entrepreneur, every builder, every owner, none of them moved through life with perfect certainty. They moved with calculated courage. That is different, because courage is not the absence of fear. It is disciplined movement despite fear. And that distinction changes everything financially. Now think about how most people approach money emotionally. They fear investing because markets fluctuate. Fear borrowing because debt can become dangerous. Fear business because uncertainty exists. Fear ownership because responsibility increases. Meanwhile, they feel strangely comfortable remaining dependent forever. That contradiction is fascinating. People fear strategic risk while accepting guaranteed stagnation. Why? Because the human brain confuses familiarity with safety. Even painful familiarity can feel emotionally safer than uncertain growth. That is why so many people remain financially stuck while secretly dreaming of freedom. They are not lazy. They are psychologically trapped between desire and fear. And unfortunately, modern culture intensifies fear constantly. Economic headlines, market crashes, inflation fears, recession narratives, social comparison, failure stories, amplified online. Fear spreads faster than wisdom, especially in digital environments. That is why mentally strong borrowers and investors learn to filter emotional noise aggressively, not ignore reality. Filter distortion, because distorted fear creates terrible decisions. Now listen carefully to this sentence. Fear makes people abandon long-term strategy for short-term emotional relief. That happens every day financially. People panic sell, panic spend, panic borrow, panic quit. Emotion overrides clarity. And banks, markets, advertisers, and institutions all understand emotional behavior deeply. Why? Because emotional people are predictable. Fearful people seek comfort quickly, and comfort often becomes expensive. Now let us go deeper. There are different types of financial fear. Fear of losing money, fear of making mistakes, fear of judgment, fear of responsibility, fear of starting too late, fear of looking inexperienced, and perhaps the most dangerous one of all, fear of becoming different from your environment. This silently traps countless people. Imagine someone grows up around financial instability their entire life. Debt normalized, stress normalized, scarcity normalized, poor habits normalized. Now they begin trying to think differently. Immediately internal conflict appears. Because growth often requires psychological separation from familiar patterns. And that feels uncomfortable emotionally. Humans naturally seek belonging, even if the group behavior is destructive. That is why many people unconsciously sabotage themselves financially to remain emotionally familiar with their environment. But the disciplined individual eventually realizes something powerful. Familiarity is not always safety. Sometimes familiarity is stagnation wearing comfortable clothing. Now here is another dangerous fear. Fear of appearing behind. This destroys patience constantly. In 2025, people see others succeeding online and immediately feel late. Late financially, late professionally, late in life. But comparison distorts reality. You rarely see the full picture behind public success. You see outcomes, not pressure. You see lifestyle, not debt. You see confidence, not anxiety. And many people performing wealth publicly are privately fragile, emotionally and financially. Never forget that. Now, let us talk about fear of debt specifically. This audiobook is not telling you to worship borrowing. That would be foolish. Debt handled carelessly destroys lives every year. But irrational fear can also become expensive, because refusing all leverage automatically may limit opportunities unnecessarily. The key is understanding. A person terrified of all debt often avoids strategic opportunities entirely. A reckless borrower embraces all debt emotionally. Both extremes are dangerous. Financial maturity exists between emotional fear and emotional recklessness. Calm analysis, strategic thinking, controlled risk. That is where intelligent borrowing lives. Now imagine someone with an opportunity to acquire a productive asset. They study carefully, calculate conservatively, prepare responsibly. But fear whispers, what if something goes wrong? That question matters. But here is the deeper question. What happens if you spend your entire life avoiding every meaningful opportunity because uncertainty exists? That possibility should concern you too, because life itself contains uncertainty. No path eliminates risk completely. The employee risks layoffs. The investor risks volatility. The entrepreneur risks failure. The borrower risks pressure. Risk is unavoidable. The real question becomes, which risks create possibility and which risks create dependency? That is a more intelligent conversation. Now, here is one of the most important financial truths you will ever hear. The goal is not to eliminate risk. The goal is to become capable of managing it. That changes everything psychologically, because now growth becomes about strengthening yourself, not hiding from life. And strong people approach money differently, not emotionally, not impulsively, strategically. Now let us explore another hidden fear. Fear of responsibility. Many people say they want wealth, but subconsciously fear the responsibility attached to ownership. Ownership requires decision-making, maintenance, patience, stress, tolerance. Consumption is easier emotionally. You buy, you enjoy, you move on. But building systems requires maturity. That is why not everyone becomes an owner. Ownership exposes character, and leverage exposes emotional discipline quickly. Now imagine two people facing financial uncertainty. One becomes emotionally reactive immediately, the other becomes analytical. The second person usually survives better long term. Why? Because panic narrows thinking. Fear creates tunnel vision, and tunnel vision often leads to destructive short-term decisions. That is why calmness becomes financially valuable. Calm people negotiate better, observe better, wait better, think better. Emotional stability creates strategic advantage, especially during economic volatility. Now think about markets historically. Every major downturn created fear. Every major downturn also created opportunity. The difference between people who benefited and people who collapsed often came down to preparation and emotional control. Prepared individuals moved differently during uncertainty. They preserved liquidity, maintained discipline, avoided overleveraging, stayed patient, and when others panicked, they positioned themselves carefully. That is why emotional regulation matters more than hype financially. Hype creates excitement temporarily. Regulation creates longevity, and longevity compounds. Now let us address something painful but necessary. Many people are more afraid of embarrassment than poverty. Think about that carefully. They fear looking unsuccessful, driving modest cars, living below their means, saying no socially. So they financially strain themselves maintaining appearances. That is dangerous, because appearance-based decision-making eventually becomes exhausting, and exhaustion weakens clarity. The smart borrower eventually becomes emotionally independent from external validation. That independence creates freedom, because now decisions are based on long-term value, not short-term approval. Now here is another critical distinction. Fear and caution are not the same thing. Caution is intelligent. Fear is emotional paralysis. Caution studies, calculates, prepares. Fear delays endlessly, and delay compounds too. Years disappear surprisingly fast. Many people spend decades getting ready emotionally while never positioning themselves strategically. Now, obviously, reckless action is foolish, but endless hesitation is also costly. There must be balance. The smart borrower learns to move thoughtfully despite uncertainty, not because certainty exists, because preparation exists. Preparation creates confidence, not fake confidence, not motivational confidence, earned confidence, the kind built from understanding systems deeply. Now imagine someone spending years studying money carefully, learning credit, learning cash flow, learning leverage, learning psychology, learning ownership. Eventually, fear decreases naturally. Why? Because understanding reduces emotional chaos. Confusion intensifies fear. Clarity reduces it. That is why education matters enormously financially. And not just technical education, psychological education, understanding your emotional triggers, your spending patterns, your fear responses, your impulsive tendencies. Self-awareness becomes financial armor, because once you understand yourself, you become harder to manipulate, harder to pressure, harder to tempt, harder to destabilize emotionally. That is modern financial strength. Now let us talk about courage one more time. Courage financially does not mean gambling recklessly. It means being willing to act responsibly despite uncertainty, applying for opportunity, building systems, starting small, learning continuously, positioning strategically. That quiet courage changes lives. And often, the biggest breakthroughs happen after someone finally stops waiting to feel perfectly ready. Because perfect certainty never arrives. Action creates clarity more often than overthinking does. Now, here is a sentence worth remembering forever. Fear protects comfort. Courage builds freedom. And freedom always requires some level of discomfort initially. Now, in the next chapter, we are going to discuss something almost every financially successful person eventually masters. Income velocity. Not just how much money you make, but how intelligently money moves through your life, your systems, and your opportunities, because money sitting still behaves very differently than money deployed strategically. And once you understand velocity, you begin seeing cash itself in an entirely different way. Chapter 9. Most people think financial success is about income alone. Make more money, earn a bigger salary, work harder, climb higher. But there is another concept almost nobody discusses properly: income velocity. And once you understand it, you stop looking at money as something to merely collect. You begin seeing money as movement, because stagnant money behaves differently than strategic money. Now listen carefully to this sentence. It is not only about how much money enters your life, it is about how intelligently money moves once it arrives. That changes everything. Imagine two individuals earning exactly the same amount annually. One person receives income, then immediately disperses it into liabilities: rent, luxury upgrades, impulse purchases, subscriptions, debt payments, lifestyle maintenance. The money enters and disappears. The second person receives income and directs part of it intentionally into productive systems, investments, skill acquisition, business infrastructure, cash flowing assets, liquidity reserves. The money enters, then begins generating movement. That is velocity, and velocity compounds. Now understand something deeply important. Money that only exits your life creates dependency. Money that circulates strategically creates expansion. This is one of the biggest mindset differences between consumers and builders. Consumers ask, "How much can I spend?" Builders ask, "How many times can this money continue working?" That single shift transforms financial behavior. Now let us explore something fascinating. Banks understand velocity extremely well. That is why they want money constantly moving through systems: loans, interest, investments, payments, transactions. Movement creates profit. And once financially intelligent people understand this, they begin positioning themselves differently. They stop thinking only like earners. They begin thinking like allocators, because allocation determines whether income becomes temporary comfort or long-term leverage. Now think carefully about this. Many high earners remain financially trapped because their money has no productive direction. Large income, low intentionality, everything flows outward into lifestyle inflation. And eventually, the person realizes something painful. Despite years of hard work, very little structural freedom was created. Why? Because money was consumed faster than it was deployed strategically. Now compare that to someone with moderate income but high intentionality. Every dollar receives direction. Every increase in income strengthens infrastructure. Every financial decision considers future positioning. That person may appear slower initially, but over time, systems begin forming, and systems change life. Now here is one of the greatest misunderstandings in modern culture. People think wealth means possessing expensive things. Real wealth is closer to possessing systems that continuously create options. That distinction matters enormously. A luxury car creates image. A productive system creates freedom. Image fades quickly. Freedom compounds. Now let us talk about liquidity. Liquidity is emotional stability in financial form. The ability to move, adapt, respond, survive. Position yourself strategically. And many people unknowingly destroy liquidity, trying to look successful too early. Everything becomes tied up. Massive payments, expensive obligations, overextended lifestyles. Suddenly, flexibility disappears. And without flexibility, fear increases. That is why smart borrowers value liquidity deeply, not because they fear spending, because they understand opportunity. Opportunity rarely announces itself years in advance. Sometimes opportunity appears suddenly. A market shift, a business opening, a strategic investment, a distressed asset, a relocation possibility. Prepared individuals move differently during these moments. Why? Because they preserved flexibility while others consumed theirs. Now listen carefully to this sentence. The financially prepared person experiences uncertainty differently than the financially fragile person. That difference changes emotional life completely. Prepared people still experience stress, but not panic, and panic destroys strategic thinking. Now let us discuss something important about velocity psychologically. Money follows attention. What you consistently study, you improve. What you ignore usually weakens. Most people spend years learning how to earn, but almost no time learning how to direct. That imbalance creates problems, because earning without allocation often creates exhaustion instead of freedom. A person works harder and harder while their financial structure remains fragile underneath. That eventually creates emotional burnout. Now, imagine someone who learns how to make money, but never learns how to multiply money. They become dependent on constant labor. But another person learns how to redirect income into productive assets repeatedly. Over time, the second person creates assistance. Their money begins participating in wealth creation independently. That changes psychological pressure dramatically. Now let us go deeper into strategic borrowing again. The smart borrower understands that borrowed capital should ideally accelerate productive velocity, not stagnation. Borrowing for cash-flowing opportunities behaves differently than borrowing for emotional consumption. One increases future movement. The other freezes future income into repayment cycles. That distinction matters. Now, obviously, not every investment succeeds perfectly. That is reality. But disciplined positioning still creates long-term advantage over permanent passivity. And passivity is dangerous financially, especially in rapidly changing economies. Now think about 2025 carefully. Artificial intelligence is changing industries rapidly. Automation is reshaping labor. Digital finance moves instantly. Global competition increases yearly. In this environment, depending solely on one income stream becomes increasingly risky. That is why strategic individuals focus on building multiple forms of movement: skills, assets, investments, ownership, networks, digital systems, velocity. Because velocity creates resilience, and resilience creates calmness. Now here is another powerful truth. Emotionally immature people often stop money movement accidentally. How? By purchasing dead weight repeatedly. Things that require maintenance but produce nothing. Things that inflate ego but weaken flexibility. Things that create status while reducing optionality. And slowly, their financial energy becomes trapped. That is dangerous, because trapped financial energy creates trapped life energy too. Now compare that to someone intentionally directing money toward production. Even small production matters. A skill-producing side income, a modest investment portfolio, a small digital business, a carefully acquired property, a scalable system. None of these may look dramatic initially, but movement compounds. And eventually, the systems begin carrying part of life's weight. That is where freedom begins psychologically. Not complete freedom overnight, reduced dependency. That matters enormously. Now let us discuss another hidden trap: idle ambition. Many people consume endless financial content emotionally, without implementing anything consistently. They become addicted to inspiration instead of execution. That creates illusion without movement. And unfortunately, modern digital culture rewards information consumption heavily. People watch videos about wealth while remaining behaviorally unchanged for years. Knowledge alone does not create velocity. Action does. Consistent action. Now listen carefully. The smart borrower does not chase complexity first. They master flow first: income management, expense awareness, strategic allocation, behavioral consistency. And if this journey gave you clarity, share it with someone who feels trapped by pressure, debt, fear, or confusion. Sometimes a single shift in perspective can redirect an entire life. Subscribe if you are committed not only to financial growth, but to emotional mastery, discipline, awareness, and freedom. And tell us what audiobook topic you want next. Emotional intelligence, silent discipline, psychological warfare, self-control, masculine focus, wealth psychology, relationship dynamics, or another deep transformation journey. Now remember this final line: the people who truly win financially are not the people who chase money emotionally. They are the people who build themselves so powerfully that money eventually begins flowing toward their discipline. The journey begins now. The rest of your life is waiting.